Welcome to a discovery of the ancient past of our North American continent. I am Terry Wilson of the Avon Historical Society.
And I am Jennifer Bennett of the Avon Senior Center.
Avon, Connecticut is a small New England town incorporated in 1830. In 2019, Avon gained new recognition when the oldest human occupation site in southern New England was discovered along the banks of our Farmington River.
This site was an astounding archaeological find that has opened up the understanding of a world unknown to most. The time period of 12,500 years ago, which to put into context is about 10,000 BC, and is 5 times older than the Egyptian pyramids.
It was a time when people we call Paleoindians roamed this continent, north and south, east and west, following the caribou for food and clothing, while also fishing in our vast waterways. They lived a life we can only envision, from the artifacts left behind and through the Native American stories passed down over millennium and still shared today.
But what do we really know about the Paleoindians of this continent? Who were they? When and how did they arrive? And what did they find when they did?
How did they travel and survive the rebirth of a continent from the last ice age, which receded 17,000 years ago?
Do you know what animals roamed this land? The trees and plants that thrived, creating the landscape we call home today.
These questions and more are explored in 20 one-hour interactive webinars presented and recorded between 2021 and 2024, just as the analysis of the newly discovered site was progressing.
A collaboration among the Avon Historical Society, the Avon Free Public Library, and the Avon Senior Center created the series of talks entitled Unearthing History.
Welcome everyone, I'm Tina Panic from the Avon Library. We are here to launch our Unearthing History series,
featuring period-specific experts such as geologists, archaeologists, bioarchaeologists, scientists, researchers, and students who helped discover the site in 2019.
As some of you may know, the discovery of the Brian Jones Paleoindian site along the Farmington River in Avon happened in early 2019. In February 2020, we held the first public presentation about it at the Avon Senior Center. This series is designed to break down information for the general public about the 12,500-year-old site.
Each expert guides a lively discussion on topics such as what is the science of archaeology, as well as new high-tech tools that explain ancient hunting and foraging methods, and more.
I really feel strongly that one should get permission for doing ancient DNA research from descendant communities or from affiliated communities, no matter what. It's really important.
The discoveries made at the Avon site include bones of fish, turtles, deer, and other animals eaten by the Paleoindians. Varied evidence of natural materials used as hunting tools proved their trading abilities, and botanicals from numerous plants and vegetation they gathered for food.
The next 30 minutes gives you a quick snapshot of what all 20 webinars cover. We hope you enjoy it and are intrigued enough to learn more about the life and times of the Paleoindian by viewing the full-length version of each webinar on the library's YouTube site. Hey, binge watch if you like.
It's well worth it.
Archaeology is the study of ancient and recent human past through material remains. Material remains can be a lot of things. It can be scallop shell pottery. It can be kaolin pipes. It can be masks that we wore. So archaeology is the study of these materials that humans leave behind. We often call these things artifacts. But what is an artifact? So an artifact is anything that has been made or altered by a human. And what are those kind of things that we see? These are artifacts. We have an axe here. We have some polychrome pottery here. We've got some channel flakes from the Templeton site. We've got some medical masks I wore last week. Once you have the materials back from the site, the materials need to be processed. In the past, we used to have staff and volunteers wash them, like clean them. They were just spick and span clean. We don't do that anymore because a lot of residues and a lot of science has changed in the analysis of residues and things that can be found on artifacts. And so the dirtier the objects are, or at least the more evidence that they have on them from that original site, sometimes the better they are to analyze. All living beings produce carbon 14. So a plant gets carbon through the photosynthesis process. We eat the plant, or we eat the turkey that holds it. And as soon as the living thing dies, it begins to decay. And carbon has a half-life in a specific amount of years. It is measurable, and we can measure this through this carbon-14 dating method. This is really important because this wasn't always available. It wasn't until the mid-20th century, till around the 50s, the advances in carbon dating have only increased as the years progressed. It used to be that you needed a very large piece of carbon. Now you need a very small piece. They can do it from a very small, minute amount of carbon, which just kind of really increases the amount of data that you can get from an archaeological site. And if the carbon is saved, and was saved properly, it can be analyzed again. So archaeological material retained from the site can still give us information, even decades after it has been excavated.
This presentation is going to be divided into 3 parts. Why does the Farmington River flow northward in Avon, Connecticut? Can you count 7 rock layers while driving on Route 44? And where can you find a big rift valley in Connecticut? So, except for the Farmington River, all major tributaries to the west of the Connecticut River flow in an eastward direction, southern direction, or southeastward direction. I highlighted the Farmington River, and so you can see that it's not always the case. The Farmington River follows this pattern until it takes an abrupt turn in Farmington, Connecticut, and flows almost due north many miles. Why is it doing that? The answer is glaciation. Over the last 2 million years, glaciers that originated up in northern Canada flowed down and extended as far as you see. That I overtraced that map, and that's the most southern extent of the glaciers. So glaciers came down, they melted back up, they came down again, stayed around for a while, and melted back up. So why did the Farmington River take a sharp turn and flowed northward? High mounds of rocks, sand, gravel, boulders were dumped by melting glaciers and blocked the Farmington River from continuing to flow southeastward. So it's all because the glaciers dumped a load. The Farmington River couldn't make it, and therefore it had to double back and it had to flow somewhere else.
Our next question is a clarifying one. I thought you said glacial rocks caused the Farmington River to turn north in Avon. I thought it was the Metacomet Ridge, which would be Avon Mountain. Can you please clarify?
Excellent point. The Farmington River was hemmed in by the Metacomet Ridge. What it's doing is that it wants to flow this way, but it can't. So notice how for this section, it's really hugging the Metacomet Ridge. So the reason why it does that, it can't flow eastward, but so it's blocked from following the Metacomet Ridge this way. It's blocked by a big mound of glacial material left after the glacier melted. So therefore it can't go that way, and it has to sneak up, and it's basically running parallel to the Metacomet Ridge. So good point, good clarification, thank you.
And to understand why the Paleoindian period took place on the calmer side of the river, northern part of the river, because it was probably easier to work there and easier there to transport and to use the waterways there. So that's a terrific point. And then a lot of the material you talked about is the material that I think was found in some of the tools that were uncovered at that site. So now we know why.
They may have worked up and down the river. It's really where are the conditions perfect to preserve their habitation. That's why it's perfect on that north side. A rift is a land feature. It's when rock layers are moving apart. So under the water is called the mid-ocean ridge, but when the mid-ocean ridge came up onto Iceland, that's called a rift valley. So the Connecticut Valley is a rift valley. You can see that on the left-hand image. In green, I traced Route 44. Route 10 coming up from the south, I traced in purple. And you can see where Route 10 is, just to orient yourself. You can see where Route 44 is. But if you'll notice that there are 7 colors here. This bedrock map wanted to show rocks that are the same type will have the same color. Here is my hokey map to show you the changes in elevation as you go from left to right. But you can see a cross section of Avon Mountain. The town of Avon is on the left. The town of West Hartford is on the right. Above the surface, you see that on the Avon side, at the base of Avon Mountain, you see the intersection of Route 10 and Nod Road with Route 44.
In the first half of the 20th century, when classifying people according to their race was still going strong, and in fact, it became the central preoccupation of the discipline of physical anthropology, a new discipline in the United States, founded by a small group of scholars. Today, so we are able now to sequence whole genomes, which is the most amount of information about a person's genetic ancestry that it is possible to obtain. And our discipline, my discipline, changed its name very recently from American Association of Physical Anthropologists to the American Association of Biological Anthropologists, in part to distance ourselves from this old typological approach that was taken by the field. We used to have a pretty good idea of how people came here. New models, new data have emerged that have revealed to us that the process of peopling the Americas is far, far more complicated than we had originally envisioned. Our ability to understand what happened is limited by the tools and the data that are available. So I'm going to be telling you a lot about genetics, but I want you to understand that our data set, the actual number of genomes that we have to reconstruct these histories, every time we sequence a new genome, it changes the story, sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot. While I prioritize genetics as a tool for understanding the past in my own research, the stories that DNA not the only way to understand how history is unfolded. And the same is true for all of the approaches on the screen. Around the same time, these two massive North American glaciers begin to melt. We start to see the emergence genetically of 2 major groups of ancestors from whom all Native Americans are descended south of the Arctic. And they derive from this branch that moves down, referred to as ancestral Native Americans. These 2 branches that split are referred to as Northern Native Americans, which are found in this region, and Southern Native Americans, which are found everywhere else. Okay, so the timing of these splits between NNA and SNA gives us some insights into the routes that the first peoples may have taken. So we talked earlier about how paleoclimatic reconstruction showed us there were 2 basic routes into the Americas following the LGM. So Clovis' first model suggests that people move through this ice-free corridor that opens up between the glaciers. The best estimates, maybe they were definitely open by 13,000 years ago, maybe as early as 14,900 years ago, but that's probably pushing it a bit earlier than I think the evidence really supports. The oldest archaeological evidence for human presence in the corridor dates to about 12,400 years ago. The West Coast would have become deglaciated earlier, as I mentioned, but at least by 16,000 years ago, probably as early as 17,000 years ago. And so a lot of us argue that the West Coast by boat is the more likely route that the first peoples took into the Americas. The indigenous peoples of the Americas diversified extremely fast, extremely rapidly, suggesting a movement from North to South America very, very fast. And the geneticists who describe this finding describe it as akin to leapfrogging across large portions of the landscape. That's not a thing you see when people are traveling slowly by land, right? This is a signature more likely consistent with a boat. And archaeologists then began to rethink how the peopling of the Americas might have occurred. So they looked at other known pre-Clovis sites, and they began to recognize new ones. And these are just some of the new sites here, newer sites that were identified. I want to focus on this one for a second, the Page-Ladson site, which dates to 14,500 years ago in Florida. So at Page-Ladson, in underwater layers dated to 14,550 years ago, archaeologist Jesse Halligan, working with Mike Waters and a whole team of archaeologists from Texas A&M, found a fragment of a bifacially flaked knife. And here it is. She found additional flakes a bit farther away, and elsewhere in the site, a mastodon tusk that had been butchered. It had cut marks on it. Humans had butchered it. The team of archaeologists were able to obtain over 200 radiocarbon dates, and from a lot of them from sticks lying right next to the stone tools. They're actually the remains of plants that the mastodons had been eating. And then all of this stuff right here, I don't know if you can see my cursor, all this stuff is poop. This is all mastodon poop. And so she was excavating through the mastodon poop and was able to find just a lot of this mastodon digesta, and was able to therefore very precisely date every layer in this underwater site. And together, these layers show that the site was in good stratigraphic order, which is, of course, crucially important for assessing the validity of a site.
Tonight we have with us an expert in LIDAR, light detection and ranging, otherwise known as airborne laser scanning, which is a very cool technology that Dr. Will Ouimet used at the Brian D. Jones site as part of the study to estimate the extent of the size of the site beyond the area discovered in 2019, which was limited in scope due to the bridge construction in progress. Using core samples and LIDAR, we now have a much better idea of the large area that was used for thousands of years by the indigenous people who came here. I have 3 photos of that day. In this first one, you see Dr. Ouimet holding a pipe pounded into the ground to bring up the samples from thousands of years ago. In that last photo, this one, is the dirt that he allowed me to touch, which could be from more than 12,500 years ago because it was slightly deeper than the Brian Jones site. He was so excited about the possibilities here that we asked him to present on how this technology and LIDAR tells the story beyond what we can see.
And I'm the kind of geologist who cares a lot about the Earth's surface and all of the ways in which the Earth's surface, the landforms and the landscapes that we see and interact with in our lives kind of come about. My whole career was spent looking at the landscape, and then the arrival of LIDAR has kind of transformed my ability to see things in my computer screen that I had to be upfront and close with to ever see before. And so here you see me in Taiwan, using a DEM, a digital elevation model, to highlight something I'm teaching. But it's so fundamental to the way we kind of understand the landscape, so that we're always on the lookout for better ways to visualize the landscape. It stands for light detection and ranging. And really what it's about is visualization of the Earth's surface at sub-meter resolution. So the idea here is that we have the ability to kind of create a 3-dimensional model or a digital elevation model of the land surface, where individual resolution of that data is at meter or sub-meter scale. And just here you see a range of images that really highlight the different ways in which LIDAR is kind of transforming our ability to visualize the 3D structure of the Earth, from actually mapping individual cities, kind of the urban and suburban landscape, to mapping out active floodplains, and really understanding in a very, very precise way flood risk and flood hazards, as you see here in the lower right. And then some of the applications that we'll touch on today are applications in archaeology, and then applications in Earth surface processes and Earth surface mapping, which you see examples of in the upper areas here. Okay, just to give you an example of what we mean by this revolution, what you see here is an image, a pair of in Ashford, Connecticut. What you see on the left is an air photo, which just basically shows that the terrain is all forested today. And what you see in the middle was basically the best example, the highest resolution DEM that was available for this landscape up until about 2000, early 2000s. Okay, and basically this map is made from old topographic maps. And so what LiDAR allows us to do is penetrate the forest canopy and see the land, the kind of forest floor at a full resolution, the kind of resolution that you would see by walking around. Okay, and so that's really the power of LiDAR overall. But the concept of laser scanning, it goes beyond just attaching it to an airplane. You can put it on a tripod and you can collect what's called terrestrial LiDAR. Imagine just putting it on a tripod and kind of facing the laser scanner at a rock outcrop or some other object, and you can scan that way. You can also put this technology on a helicopter, or even now a drone. So you can have drone-based LiDAR data and get even closer to the land surface. The other technology that people often talk about when we talk about this is called structure for motion. It's also called photogrammetry. The idea is with multiple pictures of the same object taken from 2 points in space, you can actually reconfigure and kind of model the three-dimensionality of that object. Just on the right here, you see a whole list of applications that geologists are using this technology for, basically to better understand the way surface processes modify the land surface. And so whether it's faults or earthquakes or landslides displacing material, these are all ways that the Earth's surface can change, and a technology like LiDAR with the ability to measure and quantify that change is really vital.
What is your greatest LiDAR wow discovery moment, and how did you come to have this as a career? Because the audience is fascinated.
I will always take advantage of the resources that we have as scientists to better understand the Earth system and the Earth's surface. And so I come at LiDAR from a being curious about as a geologist, being curious about the Earth, how it changes and evolves through time. And LiDAR is just the latest way that we can study it. And it's truly transformative in how easy we can pan around and just see different examples. Like I can go up to northern Maine right now. I've never been there. Just start browsing around. Oh my gosh, there's that feature. There's this feature. And you can immediately have this lens into the landscape that just from the ability to see it. I think for me, the wow was the charcoal hearths. We ended up calling these relic charcoal hearths. These are flat circular platforms upon which there was a charcoal mound or a temporary earthen kiln where trees that were cut down were slowly burned and converted to charcoal. And that really I've published 6 papers on it. Now I've got numerous undergraduate students and graduate students, study them in the field. I think about their impact on carbon storage, because they basically buried charcoal stores carbons in our forests. There's all kinds of interesting environmental questions that come from studying them, all from initially seeing them in the LiDAR data.
Tonight, we're going on a journey that I'm sure, pretty sure none of us have ever seen. It takes us to a time when a large sea was just to our north. Our presenter tonight is Dr. Francis Jess Robinson, Vermont State Archaeologist. He works for the Division of Historic Preservation in Montpelier. He's not only an archaeologist, but he has a degree in literature too, so he makes him a good storyteller.
So this is what the Northern Hemisphere looked like at the height of the last glacial maximum, around 24,000 years ago. If you notice up in the upper left, that is the New England / Maritime Peninsula, all the way down to Long Island, covered in some cases up to a mile of glacial ice. All of that ice was storing an enormous amount of planetary water, which made the oceans lower by hundreds of meters, or several hundred feet. And in our neck of the woods, the continental shelf was much more exposed throughout much of the Paleoindian period. And we know that Paleoindians were utilizing the continental shelf because fluted points have been found in places like Nantucket, and these from Martha's Vineyard, photographic courtesy of Jim Richardson and Bill Moody, that show us that people were walking to the outer edges of the continental shelf, perhaps like the people in the Champlain Valley, utilizing aquatic resources about which we would otherwise have no information. The problem with this nuanced understanding of Paleo-Indian peoples is that the continental shelf, as many or most of you well know, has been inundated by rising sea levels since the Paleo-Indian period. While not impossible to study sites of that antiquity, the technologies are just being developed, and the area to survey is extremely broad. Unlike all those other areas, the Champlain Valley is almost unique in that it has been rising since the late Pleistocene. The isostatic rebound has meant that the shorelines are just arising more and more and are not inundated by rising sea levels, and therefore offer a really unique opportunity in the Northeast and really in much of North America to study how Paleo-Indian native people would have utilized these ancient environments. We don't know a lot about the Paleo-Indian people in our state or really anywhere, but we do know that they utilized, much like their brethren in the West, stones from very high quality but very disparate sources. Hudson Valley, Monsungan Lake, and Pennsylvania. And here on the left, you can see those sources highlighted, a straight line distance of roughly 850 kilometers through varying mountainous terrain, including the greens and the whites and the hill and range country in between. Oh yeah, here's just some pointing out where some of these sources are from. The most notable thing I want to highlight is that we should have known this when we were running the analysis, but it was actually quite shocking to us. And that if you wanted to get from the Mahan site to the Monsungan Lake Chert source, or vice versa, again, depending upon the flow of the river, by far the easiest way would have been to traverse along the Champlain Sea, all the way up to what is now the Etchemin River, and then cut into the west branch of the Penobscot to the Monsungan Lake source. Again, there's some lighter green that cut through the White Mountains, but you can see the dark green indicates that in aggregate, traveling along the Champlain Sea would have been the easiest route to that disparate source. Wood would have been very sparse and not enough to make dugout canoes or likely birch bark boats, but hide boats would have been certainly within the realm of possibility of Paleo-Indian people. Other people have suggested this before, like this image of modern Arctic native people today. Perhaps would have been an easy way to traverse across the length and breadth of the Champlain Sea. It also could be that you traveled along the margins of the Champlain Sea, basically walking along the beaches as an easy way to get to where you're going. Or, much like Arctic peoples today, you could have traveled it in the winter when it is likely that at least the southern arm of the Champlain Sea was covered in ice. We know this because harbor seal and one other variety of seal require landfast ice to raise their pups. Those seal remains have been found in the Champlain Valley, Champlain Sea sediments.
So micro or use wear analysis is this technique that we can use to answer the question of how are stone tools used. What we do is we basically examine the surface of a stone tool under a microscope, and based on patterns of breakage on the surface, we can see how that tool was used. And many people think that residue analysis and microwear are the same thing, but they are actually different. So microwear, just looking under a microscope, using your eyes to see what's there. Blood, or what's actually called protein residue analysis, is used to identify what our stone tools are used for, but using chemistry. So it's actually called protein residue analysis, but colloquially we call it blood residue analysis because that is most often what we're looking for. So microwear is my primary research tool as an archaeologist, and I can do that myself with a microscope. But residue analysis is primarily doing lab-based chemistry. experimentation is sort of a required part of any sort of this analysis. What we've discovered is that the way that stone tools break is really strict, right? It governs these rules we call fracture mechanics. The way it develops those fracture patterns on the edge falls in certain categories based on how the tool was used and how hard of a material it was used on. So what's really important for microware analysts is we create these massive experimental collections. We basically use hundreds upon hundreds of stone tools personally, so we know exactly for how long it was used, on what, and sort of how it responded, to create these massive comparative collections. And a big part of this is we try to get as close to how people would have used them in the past as we can within the limits of kind of our modern lives. A really fundamental question in archaeology is, what are stone tools used for? And this seems really simple, especially if we're thinking about something like projectile points, right? These are kind of the creme de la creme of artifacts. These are what we get really excited about. And when we look at projectile points, we say, I know what that is. It's either an arrow or it's a spear, and it was used to kill animals. It's inherent in what we see. We feel like we understand it. I actually argue that basing what you think a tool is used for by what it looks like or how it fits in your hand is a really bad idea. People are creative creatures, right? We're the clever monkeys. And we pretty regularly use tools for something way beyond their intended purpose. So take, for instance, your standard flathead screwdriver. Based on the design and its form, it has two jobs. It's either to place or it's to remove flat-headed screws, right? That's all we use it for. But we use this tool for all sorts of things it wasn't intended for. It could be installing an eye bolt, or opening paint cans, stealing an older model car, or accessing parts of your computer that Dell really wishes you wouldn't access. So just because that's what the tool looks like it's used for, or that's what it was designed for, doesn't mean it's actually what it's used for. And this is even more important if the form isn't giving us any clues. So if I showed you this pile of lithic debitage, or the product of making stone tools, and I told you that in that pile of sort of unassuming rocks is a huge variety of tools, we would have a really hard time determining their uses just based on what they look like. Frankly, we would have a really hard time sorting out which of these actually were used as tools, and the ones that are just waste flakes, that are just the product of making other tools. And this is where analyses like microware and residue analysis can be really powerful tools for archaeologists, because they can let us see aspects of human behavior in the past that might not be visible through other means. So these technologies can really be amazing tools for enhancing our understanding of the activities at an archaeological site, in particular sites where there's very little preservation of organic materials. So for places like New England, this really matters. We have pretty unfavorable geochemistry around here, so we rarely get preserved organics. And so these techniques might be our only opportunity to see the soft portions of people's lives. We as paleoarchaeologists, we tend to be a little guilty of being sort of stones and bones archaeologists. But the majority of people's lives in the past are not made up of stones and bones. So for instance, if you look at this image of an indigenous family outside of their home, and you look at what's in this picture, we don't really see any stones and bones. We don't actually see anything in this picture that would preserve at our archaeological sites in New England. So techniques like microware and residue analysis might be the only ways we could actually see these portions of the past that really made up the majority of these people's lives. And that's really what we want to get at, is sort of how did people live at this time period.
folks, if you're living in the Farmington Valley, it's important to acknowledge the fact that we are certainly not the first human beings to inhabit the Farmington Valley, that the valley has been occupied now, as we now know for sure from the Brian Jones site, for 12,000 years. The places we all live, the sites that I excavate, were the homelands of a number of Native American groups, the Tunxus, the Masako, the Scaticoke, but there also were Mohegans up here, and Mohawks came down, and a bunch of other named groups who lived in, traveled through the Farmington Valley. And we should acknowledge the fact that we are living on the lands that were theirs. Again, recognize this. Here's a photograph of the Farmington Valley from the top, from looking down from Avon Mountain, because of the presence of the river, the freshwater sources of streams feeding into the river, the rich soil for agriculturalists, and just the very richness of that soil for plant material, for trees, for seed plants, for animals, of course. This was a tremendously attractive area for human people, a constellation of variables that would attract human settlement. And the archaeological record shows that very clearly. This is a map from a few years ago. Every one of those red diamonds represents an archaeological site in our records: Simsbury, Avon, Farmington, Canton, East Granby, and all the way straight through into Windsor. And this is only a small fraction of what actually is in the area. This is from a private residence, a garden. This all came out of a garden very close to Avon High School. So these are things that were left for years in the ground, covered up by deposition, and then dug up by somebody just planting their tomatoes, planting their roses, and this is what they found. And even in this small sample, I can tell you there are artifacts that date to 4,000 years ago and artifacts that date to maybe 500 years ago. I can tell you there are artifacts in here that are made of quartz, which is an abundant local material. That large black spear point in kind of the center bottom is hornfels, as are the two other dark ones on the bottom right. The triangular one is probably flint. So you got raw materials from all over, but primarily from the Farmington Valley, representing at least 3,500 years of occupation.
Ken, I wanted you to tie back to the Brian Jones site because that's what this whole series is about. Remember I asked earlier, can you quickly mention the woodland site that you found near there?
Oh, right. Fisher Meadow site, the pottery with the cool corrugations. You'll see that there's like a corrugation on that potsherd on the top. That's a design that was intentionally added to the wet clay that also strengthened the coils. None of this is wheel made. This is all coil made pottery. We found we're talking about the early 1980s, and that was right up against the Farmington River. Most of that site had already been destroyed by the river eroding it. So we literally found like a little thin sliver of the site, and then the river had taken the rest away. What we didn't know is if we had gone out into the soccer field, though that was in the woods, the soccer fields of Fisher Meadow, which were not that many feet away, if we had gone down there and gone down several feet far deeper than we went for the Fisher Meadow site, which is 2,500 years old, we had no idea that there was a 12,000-year-old site there. That site probably would not have been discovered had Brian not said, look, Kenny's already found sites here. There are sites along the river there. If they're going to put in a new bridge, they need to do some testing. And with that kind of support behind it, that's what inspired the work, and that's what led to the discovery of what may be the most important site in southern New England. And you know, people say, well, you're really angry that you didn't find the old site. No, not at all. We were really happy what we found, and the fact that as a result of Brian's work, this even older site was found there, I'm perfectly okay with that. That's great.
Right, and that means that there could be even more. You could probably.
I would say that could be is an understatement. There absolutely are more sites there.
Thank you for watching. We hope you enjoyed this glimpse of what life was like on this continent thousands of years ago.
We thank the Lower Farmington River and Salmon Brook Wild and Scenic Committee for their financial support for the webinar series, as well as this short preview of
Unearthing History.
binge watch if you like.
It's well worth it.